Assalamu alaikum everybody. Today I'm gonna teach you guys the graph editor. This was requested on my last video's comment section. So if you guys wanna learn anything or if you guys have any suggestions, leave that in the comment section. So without wasting any more time, let's get into the tutorial. So in order to learn the graph editor, you're gonna need to know a little about the keyframes and different types of keyframes. And I'm assuming you know how to create keyframes and play around with them, so I'm not going to go way too much in detail, but I'm just going to give you guys a small brief on the different types of keyframes because I think that's something that gets left in the dark. So to begin with, I'm going to create two keyframes. I've already created two keyframes on my timeline. I'm just going to select them both, press F9 on my keyboard to easy ease them. I'm pretty sure you already know how to do that. So in order to change the keyframe types, you select the keyframes, hit right click, and make sure that your mouse cursor is on top of the keyframe in order to get the keyframe options. Hit right click, go into keyframe interpolation, go into temporal interpolation, and the first type I'm going to talk about is the auto Bezier. Okay, I just realized something. In order for the auto Bezier to work, you will need 3 keyframes on your timeline, otherwise it's not going to work. It will showcase that you have selected the auto Bezier keyframes, but once you go into the graph editor, it's going to be a linear keyframe there. So in order for the auto Bezier to work, you're going to have to make sure that you have 3 keyframes on your timeline. And what this keyframe type does is it creates a automatic Bezier on the go. If you don't have a lot of time to customize the settings in the graph editor and you want something to be smooth on the go, you can just select the auto Bezier keyframe type and you are good to go. It's not as smooth as it should be, but it gets the job done, and that's what I know about it. If I'm missing out something on this, you can let me know in the comment section. I'm not gonna waste too much time explaining these because are really basic. That's pretty much basic stuff and it doesn't really matter, but I thought I should explain them a little. One last thing I forgot to mention about these keyframes is that if you try to change anything, it's not gonna remain auto Bezier anymore, and it's gonna turn into a Bezier or a continuous Bezier keyframe, because that, as the name suggests, it's not automatic if you are making changes to it. So that's why it changes itself to a different type of keyframe. Now we are gonna jump onto continuous Bezier keyframes, and for the continuous Bezier keyframes, I'm gonna make 2 keyframes on the scale properties, and I'm gonna delete the position keyframes for now, and I'm gonna select both those keyframes, right click, keyframe interpolation, and I'm gonna select continuous Bezier keyframes. Also for this one, we're gonna need 3 keyframes. And the reason we need 3 keyframes is to understand the point of the continuous Bezier. We need a keyframe that is in the center of 2 different keyframes. To explain this, I'm gonna stay in the value graph so you can understand what it does. If I select the center keyframe and I try to make changes to the left pick whip, the right one is gonna move with this as well, and you cannot change that unless you change the keyframe type to Bezier. That's the point of the continuous Bezier keyframe. It keeps the movement of the animation or the motion of the animation continuous. It does not break it. If I was to change one side of the pick whip and the other one stays where it is, it's gonna break the movement. It's not gonna be fluid. It's not gonna be continuous. That's what the continuous Bezier does. Now the third keyframe type is the Bezier keyframes, and unlike the continuous Bezier, you can move the pick whips separately without having to worry about the other pick whip moving. This is basically used for panning, cropping. If you have very specific movements that you want to do for your animations, you will have to use the Bezier keyframes. One last keyframe type remaining, it's called the hold keyframe. You're going to go into the temporal interpolation. We're gonna go into hold, and now as you can see, the shape of the keyframes completely changed. What this keyframe does is it holds the motion of the first keyframe until the second keyframe hits the timeline indicator. So for instance, my scale is at 100% on the first keyframe, and on the second one it is at 48%, and on the third keyframe it is at 101. So the property or the value of the first keyframe is gonna stay the same until the second keyframe hits my timeline indicator. I'm gonna play it. As you can see, it snaps to 48% and then it snaps back to 101%. This type of keyframes are basically used to create stop motion animations. I'm gonna quickly show you an example of that. Okay, now we have a bunch of keyframes. Select them all and change the keyframe type to hold. You can either go into keyframe interpolation to do that, or you can either select toggle hold keyframe to do that. Now as you can see, we have a stop motion animation, and yeah, that's all the different types of keyframes. Now we're gonna jump into the graph editor. Before we dive into the different types of graphs, I'm gonna quickly give you a tour of the different tools that you can see on the bottom of the graph editor. The first one is choose which properties are shown in the graph editor. You can toggle between only the selected properties, or if you want to see every single property that is animated, and this one as well. I don't know what this one does, so I'm gonna leave it as it is for now. And the second option is the graph type and options. It's basically a box full of options and tools. It gives you both the different types of the graphs, and you can toggle the expression editor on or off depending if you have any expressions. And you can also turn on the show reference graph. What it does is, let's say I'm on the speed graph, it's going to give me a preview of the value graph, and if I'm on the value graph, it's going to give me a preview of the speed graph. That's what the reference does. And then we have the snapping tool. You know what it does. When you are moving the pick whips around, it's going to make sure that your keyframe is snapped to the bottom, and if you have that off, it's going to move around, so you don't want to turn that off. Keep it on all the times. And the fourth option, or the fifth option, is the auto zoom graph, which is a really important tool. In the beginning, when I was learning the graph editor, I accidentally turned it off and I lost myself into the graph editor. I zoomed out accidentally and I moved my cursor up and I got lost. Even if you try to turn the graph editor off and turn it back on, you will not find your keyframes. Even if you try to select the keyframes, you're gonna not find the keyframes. So you have to make sure that the auto zoom graphite is turned on so you don't get lost like I did. The next option is fit all graphs to view. It's gonna fit all of the graphs that you have to the horizontal empty space. And if you want a certain graph or a certain keyframe to be fitted or to be zoomed in, what you're gonna wanna do is select the keyframe and click this one, fit selection to view. It only works if you have a keyframe selected. It's a selection specific tool, so I'm going to select the keyframe, click on it, and it's going to zoom the selected keyframe to the maximum. Next option is separate dimensions. If you have position keyframes like me, you can click on the separate dimension tools and it's going to separate the X and the Y position. For now, I'm going to go back to the default. These next options are also selection specific options, so for that you're gonna have to make sure that a keyframe is selected. This one is gonna give me the option manager again. I don't know what to call it. This one will convert the keyframe, the selected keyframe, into a hold keyframe. This one will convert it into a linear keyframe. This one will convert it into a auto Bezier keyframe. This is to easy ease the keyframes, easy ease in and easy ease out. Let's say this one, this is a standard keyframe, right? It has a easy in and it has a ease out, and if I click ease in, it's only gonna change the left side of the graph. Those are all the tools that you need to know. Now we're gonna jump right into the different types of graph. The first one is the speed graph. You want to make sure that you are in the speed graph if you are working with position. Unless you have separated the dimensions, then that's when you can play around with the different values in the value graph. Otherwise, if you have the position properties not separated, you will not be able to change those separately. You cannot move any of the values separately. So for now, we are gonna work with only 2 keyframes, and I'm gonna teach you guys the basic fundamental animations and how the speed graph works and what it means. So the first dot is the starting point of the animation. The second dot is the ending point of the animation. Basically, that's the first keyframe and that's the second keyframe. I'm gonna quickly take a snapshot of my graph to draw something and explain things a little better. The topmost bit, or the highest point of the curvature of the graph, indicates the fastest point of the speed graph, and the lower side of the graph indicates the slowest points. So let's say this says slow, this says fast, and this says fast. Okay, ignore my writing, I'm not used to writing on a mouse. So the topmost bit, or the highest point of the curvature, indicates the fastest point of the animation. So I'm gonna select my keyframes. This right here is where my animation is at the fastest speed, right? Because when you easy ease those keyframes, when you easy ease the keyframes, you might know that the animation starts off slowly and ends off slowly, but it's at the maximum speed in the center. I'm gonna play it. You can see it is starting off real slowly and it ends off slowly as well, but it's at the maximum speed in the center. So if I was to shift the highest bit to the left or the right, that would mean that, let's say if the highest bit was somewhere around here. Now, according to what we just learned, the fastest point of the animation should be where my timeline indicator is, right? So if I play the animation back, as you can see, it is at its maximum speed where my timeline indicator is and where the highest bit of the curvature is. So let's say if it was all the way over here, the highest point or the fastest point of the animation would be somewhere around here, right? As you saw, it starts off slowly because the graph in the beginning is very low, and in the speed graph, low means slow and high means fast. So the highest bit is supposed to be the fastest bit, and the lowest bit is supposed to be the slowest bit. So let's say if I was to shift the pick whip all the way towards the right, and this one is already all the way towards the right. Now, according to that principle, the animation should be the slowest in the beginning since it's at its lowest point, and it should be the fastest towards the end since it's the highest towards the end. So if I play it back, it should start off really slowly and then gain speed and get to the maximum speed towards the end. I'm gonna play it. As you just saw, it starts off slowly and then catches speed and gets to its maximum speed towards the end. If I were to do this the other way around, and it will be the fastest in the beginning and it will be the slowest towards the end. Let's play it. As you can see, it starts off like a bullet and then slows down. Let's say if my object was placed around here, that will be an out animation, right? And if I do that the other way around, and if I put this graph, which is called the in graph, it will create a in animation where a object is sliding in the screen, as you can see, right? Now the third basic type of graph is called a mid graph. As the name suggests, the speed or the maximum speed of the object will be in the middle, and it will be slow in the beginning and slow in the end. So in order to create a mid graph, you have to make sure that your timeline indicator is in the center of both of the keyframes, somewhere like here. That's the center. I think it's an odd number of frames between the keyframes, so I cannot find the perfect center. Now, yeah, that's the perfect center of the keyframes. As you can see, I'm perfectly centered. I'm gonna slide the right pick whip to the left at around 74% influence, and I'm gonna slide the left pick whip to the right at also at around 74% influence. And if you are skeptical of whether your graph is perfectly centered, or if you cannot find the perfect values for the influence kind of thing, you don't have to worry about the numbers. You can just zoom in and make sure that the peak of the curvature is perfectly aligned with your timeline indicator. So for me, it's perfectly in the center, and if I play the animation back, it should be slow in the beginning, slow in the end, and fastest in the middle. I'm gonna play it. Just like I said, starts off slowly, ends off slowly, and then fastest in the middle. As you can see, these are the three basic fundamental types of graphs. The first one is a in graph, and the second one is a mid graph. Oops, it's not perfectly mid, my bad. The second one is a mid graph, and the third one is a out graph. Now we're gonna jump into the value graph, and to understand the value graph, I'm gonna basically delete the position keyframes, and I'm gonna create a keyframe for the scale property because it is a single property and doesn't have two different dimensions, so we can work with it in the value graph. Now the value graphs looks something like this. Now this is where things get complicated. For now, I'm gonna delete the third keyframe. Okay, so this is the value graph. Now I want you guys to pay close attention because this graph is a little bit confusing. You can see the percentage on the left side. It says 100% over here, so I created a keyframe at 100%, and then I came down to around, I think 65. Yeah, I came down to 65%, which is all the way down here. I'm gonna tell you guys the basic principle of the value graph. I'm gonna take a snippet of the empty space to explain things better. In the speed graph, we had one keyframe on the left, one keyframe on the right. That indicates that the animation starts on the left and it starts on the right. The value graph is a little different. It is focused on the values of the keyframes rather than the speed of the keyframes. You can still change the speed of the keyframes by playing around the graph of the values. It is mainly focused on the value. So the main principle of the value graph is that 0 is at the bottom and 100 is at the top. So let's say if I had a video which was, let's say the starting point of the video was here and the ending point of the video was here. How it will look in the value graph is a little different from how it would look in the speed graph. In the value graph, if we had, let's say if we had linear keyframes, it would start from 0, right? Because that's where the starting keyframe is, and it would go kind of like this because that's where the ending keyframe is. That's 0 and that's 100. 0 indicates the beginning of the clip and 100 indicates the ending or the finishing point of the clip, and the distance or the scale of the graph is determined by the starting keyframe and the ending keyframe, but it will always be in a diagonal line because that's how it works. It's 0 on the bottom, 100 on the top, and let's say I'm gonna draw two different graphs, two different value graphs. One where a keyframe starts from here and ends here. We have, like we had before, 0 over there and 100 over there. My graph would start from here and would end here. It's a linear graph. It works on the diagonal. 0 over there, the starting point, and ends at 100%. And the scale or the horizontal spacing depends on the distance between the keyframes. Let's say if we have a really big distance between those keyframes, for example here from here, the 0 point is still at the same place and 100 is still also at the same place. My diagonal would start from here and it will go all the way where it reaches 100%. As you saw, the distance depends on the spacing between the two keyframes, right? It could go either up like that, or it could be a long diagonal like that. But the 0 and 100 will always remain the same. To stick to the principle that I just told you, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start from 65% and I'm gonna go to a 100%, so you guys don't get confused and the diagonal looks just the way I drew it. Now we have linear keyframes, so it's a straight line and doesn't have any Bezier pick whips or anything like that. To change that, I'm going to select the keyframes. I'm going to press F9 on my keyboard. I'd say the value graph is a bit nerdy. You need to use a little amount of your brain to understand that. Unlike the speed graph, which was pretty self-explanatory here. If I was to extend this pick whip from the left to the right, pay close attention to these numbers, okay? 70. You know what? Fuck it. I'm going to go to 0. It's going to begin with 0 scale and it's going to go to 100 right there. As you can see, the numbers vanished because now the scale is pretty big and I'll have to zoom in if I want to see, or I'll have to extend this if I want to see all the numbers, because now it's a pretty big graph, right? And it won't fit in the small place. If we have linear keyframes like this, it goes from 0 to 100 at a constant speed. As you can see, 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 40. There is no change in direction in the graph and it's in a straight line moving at a constant speed. This instant of my diagonal, as you can see, it indicates 25% of my animation, right? If I take the pick whip and if I extend it all the way over here, now what's happening is, imagine a straight diagonal which you would have for a linear keyframe. The instances that I should be reaching on my diagonal at a certain point of time, those instances have been moved up, meaning that you can reach those instances faster now. So for example, a point in the diagonal which is here, it has now been shifted to around here. That means I can reach to it faster now. That means the clip is gonna be fast in the beginning, and you can see that if I play my clip right now, it's fast in the beginning and slows down towards the end. Now similarly, if I reset the diagonal and I take the pick whip, bring it all the way towards the right, the diagonal was supposed to be something like this, right? And if it was a straight diagonal, it would be moving at a constant speed. I'm gonna move this one as well and bring it all the way down here. Let's say if it was a straight diagonal, the size of the circle that was supposed to be at this point of the diagonal has now been shifted far away from my timeline indicator, which means that I will have to go further in the timeline to achieve that size of the circle, which was supposed to be somewhere around here, but now since I moved the pick whips, it has now been shifted further away, resulting in the clip to slow down in the beginning, and I will have to take more time to reach the desired size of the circle. So if I play the clip now, you can see it's pretty slow in the beginning, really slow in the beginning, and it's extremely fast towards the end. As you can see, over to this point, as you can see, even at this point, it's at 5% scale. The circle has only been zoomed up to around 7.4%, right? It has only this much time left before the animation ends, and it has to go to 100%. That makes sense, bro. That's basic general common knowledge sense a kid could understand this concept, but it has only this much time before the keyframe or before the animation ends. So it has to go from 7 to 100%, which is all the way on top here. That just makes sense for it to speed up like it is speeding up, right? In like pretty much 4 frames, it has to go from a 7% scale to 100%, right? Just like that. The keyframe starts here and I'm all the way over here and has only zoomed up to 7%. That means that in this distance, it's really slow. That's why it only could zoom up to 7% from 0 after how many frames? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. After 12 frames, it only could zoom up to 7%. And in 4 frames, it has to go from 7 to 100 because 0 is on the bottom, 100 is at the top. In order to create a out graph and the value graph, what you can do is either bring the bottom pick whip all the way towards the right and make this one as small as you can. So in the beginning, it's slow. It's only up to a 15% scale or a 20% scale even after half of the animation has already been played. 60% of the animation has already been played. It is only at a 20% scale, but now it has 40% of the animation remaining to go from 20% to 100%. So it's gonna speed up and close out the distance. Slow in the beginning, fast in the end. Similarly, to create a in graph, you take the top bit towards the left and you make sure that this pick whip is as small as it can possibly get. As you can see, in just about 3 keyframes, it's already up to 50% scale because I've slowed down the ending bit. I'm not speeding up the starting point, I'm slowing down the ending point, which will result in the starting point to automatically speed up. And as you can see, in just about 4 frames, it reaches around 65% scale, and then it has around 80% of the animation left to finish up the remaining 35%. So it's gonna look something like this. Fast in the beginning, slow in the end. And now to create a mid kind of graph, what you have to do, select all the keyframes, press F9. Basic rule of thumb for the value graph is vertical means fast and the horizontal means slow. I'm not talking about 0 to 100. Forget that. That's a different concept. It is still in place. 0 is the beginning point and 100 is the ending point. But I'm just talking about about how the speed works in the value graph. The straighter the graph gets in the vertical, the faster it's going to be, and the more flat down horizontal it is, the slower it's going to get. In order to make it slow in the middle, or let's say I want to make it fast in the middle, slow in the beginning, slow in the end, I just explained you how the speed should work. So according to that principle, I want the line to be as straight as it can possibly get, so that it's really fast in the beginning and the rest will be flat down horizontal on the beginning and the end. So to do that, I'm gonna stretch the left pick whip all the way to the right and the right pick whip all the way to the left. As you can see, now the line is extremely straight in the middle, which will result it to be really fast in the middle, slow in the beginning, slow in the end. Let's play it back. As you can see, really fast in the middle. The pick whip doesn't have to be straight all the time, so you can make it smooth by doing something like this and still achieving the same results. Let's say that's why the value graph comes in clutch. It gives you a lot more customizability and a lot more options to play around with. Now it's still gonna be fast in the middle, but it's gonna be relatively smoother. As you can see, it's a lot more smoother. That's something that will come with time. You have to practice the graph. You cannot just watch a video and understand the entire concept and be the graph master the next day you wake up. It's not gonna happen. You will have to practice, put the time, put the effort. Now let's say if I wanted to be slow in the center, fast in the end, and fast in the beginning, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do the exact opposite of what I just did. I'm gonna make sure that the line is straight in the beginning, the line is straight in the end, and flatter just like this on the horizontal space in the middle. Now it's gonna shoot up fastly. It's gonna shoot up fastly in the end as well, and it's gonna be really slow in the middle. I play that, as you can see, it shoots up, slows down, and then shoots back up. And one thing you wanna have to make sure that you don't want to exceed the starting point or the ending point with the pick whips. If you do that, you are gonna go into reverse and it will fuck up your entire animation. You can do that if you know what you're doing, and if you want to have reverse animations, you can use that. You can get pretty creative with that and you can create some amazing stuff with it. But if you are a beginner who is learning the graph editor, you will have to make sure that you don't exceed the pick whip beyond the limit of the starting or the ending point. And in order to check if you are behind the keyframes, what you can do is select the keyframe and it's gonna draw you a box. You have to make sure that the yellow line is behind the edges of the box. Right now, to show you what it looks like if you make a mistake something and if you exceed the box, it's gonna create something goofy like this. You can create goofy stuff with it if you know what you're doing, but for now I'm gonna recommend you stay within the box. I'm pretty sure that's about it for the value graph as well. It all just comes with time. Once again, that's the main key difference between the value graph and the speed graph. The speed graph is pretty limited. You cannot do a lot of the stuff that you can do with the value graph, but this you have a lot of customizability with. You can create some cool reverse animations with it as well. For example, like this. I also have some presets made for the graph editor. This is a plugin called Flow. You can buy that from aescripts.com. Other websites, you can check it out. I highly recommend you to get this. You can save your presets for the graph editor once and for all. You don't have to create them every single time you're doing an animation. Just like that, I have a in graph, just as I told you. I have a out graph, and then I have a middle graph as well. I have this middle graph as well, all the different types of graphs. Now this is what you call a reverse graph. It adds a bit of a reverse element into the animation. You can see it's pretty goofy. It looks good with the right effects and with the right stuff. You can create some pretty cool stuff with it. Yeah, that's pretty much it for this tutorial. Just like I said, you're not going to be a graph master the next day you wake up, so you need to be patient, keep practicing, keep learning, keep putting efforts, keep trying to create new stuff, and you'll get a hang of it pretty soon. If you enjoyed and learned something from this video, I would highly appreciate if you guys could hit the subscribe button and just like the video and comment down below if you have any suggestions or if you have any questions. I reply to every single one of you guys. Until then, bye bye.